Hey everyone, Art Burns here. I wish you well today. So the other day I talked about attunement, and attunement is in terms of a parenting concept, attunement is the ability to kind of tune into your child's emotional status, like what your child is experiencing emotionally, right? Go past the behavioral cues that we get from our children, and get past the behavioral and reactive cycle that we often engage in as parents, right? And to get deeper into it, and to really see what our child is, see the world as our child sees it on an emotional level, right? And so, of course, this is often associated with early childhood development, right? And it's very, very vital during that time. I mean, there's no question about it. In the first, say 7 or 8 years of a child's life, parental attunement is everything in terms of that child's development, right? And often it's seen as something that's at least pre-adolescent, right? But that doesn't mean that so even though the attunement might change at that point, it doesn't go away, and neither does the need of the child for that emotional, connection and that emotional support. That doesn't go away either, right? In fact, that can last well into middle age for people. We need to have that that connection to the people who are older than us. To our parents and our caregivers, and I mean, maybe middle age is a little bit of a stretch, but I think you understand what I mean. Like, that's a lifelong value that connection can have, right? And so at a certain point, though, again, it becomes, we become as individuals become more emotionally self-sufficient, right? So that attunement does change in a very significant way. But there's something that we can always do that will help us to maintain that connection to our children, but also to everyone else in our lives, right? There's something that we can do all the time in our lives. And now more than ever, in this particular time, whether you have children who are in their, preteen, pre-adolescent ages, or even teenagers, or even young adults that you're living with, or in contact with as your children, and even besides your children, the people in the world right now. There are so many difficult conversations that are happening right now in this particular moment in history, right? There are so many difficult conversations that are happening, right? And the thing is that as human beings, we have this tendency to when we're listening to someone, we have this tendency to listen so that we can make a response, right? Like, as we're listening to someone, we're kind of waiting for a pause so that we can jump in and say something that we want to express ourselves. And actually, this can also be the source of a lot of stress for us, right? Because we feel like a pressure, like, oh my gosh, I got to come up with something to say, or else this person's going to think I'm not smart enough, or I'm not listening hard enough, or something. I got to do something that's going to, like, impress this person, right? And that's a fear, right? And as we get into that fear-based emotion, and fear-based thoughts, that's when the stress is invited into our bodies, right? And so that's not good for us, right? Especially not when we're trying to have a conversation. And moreover, you will miss a lot of information that's trying to be, that is being exchanged or attempted to be exchanged in that conversation. Because if you're not really focusing on what that person is saying, then you're not going to catch a lot of things that are, if you're too busy thinking about what you're going to come up with as you're talking to this person. And again, this can apply to a parent of a preteen or teenage or young adult, or it can apply to anyone else that you're talking about, right? And talking to. And so this is a really key ingredient in not only stress reduction, but also in living a compassionate life. Remember, I said before that when when you start into that, those ideas, or those thoughts of you know what am I going to say? This person's going to think I'm not smart. I got to come up with something. I'm nervous. I'm afraid. Right? When we get into those fear based emotions, right, and thoughts, right, what we're not doing is we're not practicing compassion. Right? Basically, the entire human spectrum of emotions, right, can be divided into two main, one main division, right? You're either in a emotion of fear, or you're in an emotion of love. Okay, that's really how you can divide it, right? All the anger, all the resentment, all the insecurity, all the anything that you can kind of name as a negative emotion, right? Is going to have its very when you boil it way down, all the way down to its root, it's going to be rooted in fear, right? And the same can be said for all the positive emotions that we feel, right? The positive emotions of happiness, of support, of excitement, and all these can all be boiled down. It's very core to some form of love, right? And eventually, essentially, what you're talking about is our emotions are doing one of two things all the time, right? They're either driving us away from something that we don't want, something that we fear, or they're driving us towards something that we do want, something that we love, right? And so that's how it works, right? So the idea of practicing compassion and the idea of intentionally practicing compassion is to intentionally live on the side of that divide that is on the side of love, right? And one way that you can do this that's super easy and super valuable, and really at this point in history, as I say, at this moment right now, it is so important and so valuable right now. And that is to train yourself to listen, right? And again, I know there's probably dozens of eyes right now rolling right into the backs of their heads saying, oh, come on, I've been listening to people my whole life, I know how to listen, what's this guy talking about? And of course, yes, we all know how to listen, that's not the question, right? Like, we all function as adults, we get information all the time, we know how to pay attention to a certain level, right? But do you know how to really truly actively listen to another person as they're talking? Right, and this is something that is part of mindfulness practice, right? Is to understand where your attention, mindfulness in general, right? Not just as applies to living, but mindfulness in general is when we're going to understand where our attention is at any given moment, right? And just knowing that is part of your is a very foundational level of well-being, like being able to know where your attention is at any given point. Neuroscientists and psychologists will line up to tell you how good that is for you, okay, emotionally and physically and mentally, right? But again, knowing when we're listening to someone, right? If we're listening and we're sitting there and saying to ourselves, like, okay, I gotta say this, I'm gonna come up with this really great profound statement that this person's, I'm gonna blow their mind, and while you're concocting that and conjuring that and trying to find the right place to put that in, right? Which is what we all do, right? That's a common thing that we all do when we're having conversations with people. When you're doing that, what you're not doing is you're not listening, because as much as we believe in the concept of multitasking, and as much as we honor the immense power that our brain absolutely has, right? Our brains can't do both those things at the same time. You can't be thinking about something and taking in information fully at the same time. You just can't do it, right? Like, nobody can, right? It's not a shortcoming of yours. It's not a failing of yours. It's impossible, right? The greatest minds in the world can't do that. Okay, and so the idea then is to and again, mindfulness, emotional intelligence, listening, stress reduction, all of these things that I talk about here, right? They are all skills. And like any skill in the world, just like when you learn to eat, when you learn to walk, when you learn to ride a bike, when you learn to play a musical instrument, when you learn to read, when you learn to write write penmanship, right? Everything that you've ever developed as a skill is trainable. You started out not knowing how to do it, or knowing how to do it on a very rudimentary level, and you practiced, and then you got better, right? You increased your skill through practice. And there's no reason why you can't do the same thing when it comes to listening. Right now, why would you want to do this? Again, like, let's say if you're a parent, right? When your child knows that he or she has your undivided attention, and that you are really listening to this person, that you are hearing them, and you are feeling them, and you are holding them in an empathic and compassionate place, they are going to feel that, right? They don't know that's happening. They won't be able to identify that. A 4 or 5, 10, 20-year-old person will not be able to identify what it is that feels so good about that. But let me tell you, they will feel your attunement to them. They will feel that emotional connection. Okay, they'll know it on an unconscious level that is vitally important, right? Vitally important. Listening to a colleague, right? If when we're trying to get things done at work, right? We're having conversations all the time in our work, right? Because we're trying to, we need to work as teams. We need to collaborate on things, right? There's a saying in business, right? Specifically with people in the sales profession, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And that's true universally in business, right? And if you're truly listening, if you're training yourself to not be thinking about the different responses that you might come up with, or the different contributions you can make to this conversation, but instead are truly actively listening to someone, I'm telling you, again, just like your children, that person is going to feel it. They might not know what it is that they're saying, right? They might not know, unless they themselves have trained themselves in this way. They might not be able to identify what they're feeling, but they're going to feel good. And they're going to want to talk to you, and they're going to want to, get that experience again. So especially in people with a sales, position or sales profession, I mean, your client's going to want to talk to you, right? It's going to be something that feels good to them, right? So that, in any part of business, right, that's going to be good. But perhaps most important and most pertinent to this moment in our history, right? We are having conversations, or at least we should be having conversations right now that are very difficult to have. Conversations surrounding racial biases, conversations surrounding social injustices, conversations involving, all these things that are alive right now, right? That are very, very important. Like, this is something that we, especially as white people, we can't turn away from these things, right? We need to acknowledge and sort of confront our own biases, our own, the way that we benefited from things like white supremacy. And it's something that's really hard to acknowledge, and it's hard to reckon with, because of course we all feel like, we've worked hard to get where we are. I feel like I've worked hard for everything that I've gotten, and I'm sure you have felt the same. Most people do, right? Most people are not sitting here saying, "Oh, well, I'm privileged." Like, we don't feel that, but systemically and historically, we do have some level of privilege. And so the conversations that we're having with each other, and holding space for one another to explore this is very, very important for the sort of, the therapy of humankind right now, right? It's really, really important. And again, if you're listening to someone, right, whether you're listening to someone who's a person of color, or you're listening to someone who's the same, a white person like you are, or whoever's listening to this, if it's a white person listening to a white person, or a white person listening to a person of color, it's really important right now, more than ever, that we actually listen, right? Like, take our ego out of it. Take our own, defenses and our own concerns and our own worries about how we're going to appear to the rest of the world. Just put it aside for a moment and really try to understand the other person, right? And in these difficult conversations, right, it's so vitally important that we intentionally show up in this way, right? Show up in a way that is, open and desirous of learning, like really, welcoming the understanding that comes through actually listening to people and actively listening to people. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you, so I've talked about this a lot. This is one of my favorite subjects, actually, is actively listening. It's something I practice all the time. And it's something that after you practice it for a while, it becomes second nature. Just like any other skill, just like any other habit, it becomes automatic. And I'm going to tell you something, folks, okay? It's not just that the other person feels it. It's not just that that person feels good and feels heard and feels that empathy and that compassion. But you know what? It feels good to me. It feels good to me to know that I'm giving this person my attention. There's a lot of people in the world who will tell you that the greatest gift you could give anyone, especially as a parent, especially as a friend, and especially as an ally to people who are suffering, the best thing that you greatest gift you can give to people is your attention, your presence, to give that to them. And actively listening is something that feels so good to give that as a kindness, as a compassion, as something that is benefiting people. It just feels great to do it, and it's good for you. It's good for your body, it's good for your mind, and it's good for your soul. It's good for you. And so if you'd like to get some instructions, it's very, very simple. I mean, I don't even need to write it down for you. It's basically just sitting down intentionally with someone and just setting a timer for a couple of minutes, right? And the first person has the person who goes first, right? Their job is just talk for 2 minutes, right? Or whatever you set the timer for. I recommend starting a little small and slow, minute, 2 minutes, something like that. Eventually go up to 3 or 4 minutes. That's great as you get better at it. But it's not a memory exercise, right? So it's not about like remembering what somebody says, but so start small, right? And the idea is that the person listening, the job is just nod your head, just say okay, no, don't say, oh really, is that right, I didn't realize, none of that, because that's going to steer the conversation. The idea is to give this person who's talking to you the space to say whatever they want to say, right? Do that for a minute or two, right? Timer goes off, and now you just reflect back what you heard, right? You just say, okay, I heard you say this, 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 and this, right? And the person will say, wow, it feels great to be heard like that, and you got this, and this right, but you didn't get that right. You missed this one part. So I'm going to repeat that to you. Oh, now I hear that you said this, that, and this. I feel heard. And I feel great. Now switch the timer, switch the roles. And now you become the speaker, the other person becomes a listener. This is something you can do with your spouse, your children, your colleagues, your friends, anyone. And this is also a great opportunity to enter into like a safe space for some of these conversations, because you can even set parameters like, okay, we're going to talk about anything except this, because triggers me, that kind of stuff. Be creative with it, and try it out. I'm telling you, folks, you're gonna, the benefits are amazing, and the feeling that you get from this is truly amazing too. So if you'd like me to send you some written instructions on this, I'd be more than happy to. I have it ready to go with my new logo on it and everything. So I can do that, or again, just be creative with it and see how it feels, and play around with it, and find the thing that works for you. But do it, because it's really, really valuable and so important, especially, like I said, right now. If you're a parent, it's always important right now, because your kids don't stop developing, right? They don't stop growing. So every opportunity that you have to connect with your children, that's vitally important. But right now, in society as a whole, the idea that we start listening to one another has never been more important. So I beg of you to try this, and let me know how it works for you. All right, thanks for listening. I wish you well. I'll be back again tomorrow. Talk to you soon.